When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject, cave-in. User, RuV9. Posted, November 28, 1995.
Sometime before midnight, in the hours leading up to the Northridge earthquake, I fell asleep while watching NBC's Sunday night movie, some dopey Sean Connery spy flick about Russia so slow it had me pining for the halcyon days of Thunderball. I don't know what time the movie ended, but when Rashida called and woke me up, it was just after midnight. "Robert, the floor," were the first words I heard upon picking up the phone. Still groggy after clawing myself out of a dream both dull and menacing. Faceless men in gray suits had been following me around the best facsimile of Moscow conjurable by the subconscious of someone who'd never left California, their relentless footsteps echoing off nameless cobblestone streets. By dream's end, I'd been herded into a crumbling apartment block, its deeply gouged plaster walls full of electronic listening equipment capable of hearing my every thought and relaying it to an intelligence far larger than I could comprehend. With the tinny rotary dial phone to my ear, Rashida's words sounded as if they could have been coming from the same unknowable place those transmitters were reporting back to, and I had to shake my head a few times to fully settle myself back in reality. "What? Rashida, what about the floor?" "It caved in." That woke me up in a hurry. For the last 20-ish years, Rashida and I have co-owned a pawn shop, occupying 3 full units at the end of a strip mall in the valley. We'd started off as a young married couple, barely scraping together rent in one single small storefront, and built from there, buying out our neighbors as time went on. We'd been married at the start, but time has proven us better business partners than romantic ones. I trusted Rashida completely, and if she said the floor had caved in, then the only thing to do was get there so we could figure out what to do next. On the drive over, it occurred to me she hadn't mentioned which floor had caved in. My assumption was that it had to be the back room of the middle unit, which had a small basement. Basements aren't common in LA for obvious reasons, so when we moved in and found this one, really just a 8x8 brick cellar, it was a novelty. I remember mentioning it to Gersom, who owned a small grocery store across the street, and it surprised him as much as it did us. "Who builds a basement in Los Angeles?" was his response, followed by a look of dawning realization. Maybe that's the tunnel my girls ask about." Naturally, I had to know more. Gersom said that his daughters were told by friends at school that their dad's shop was near one of the entrances to Glendale's secret tunnels. He hadn't paid this much mind, knowing, like everyone else, that being on a fault line made traveling underground in LA the sort of thing you did on a limited time basis, when you did it at all. I asked him if the girls had elaborated on who or what had supposedly made these secret tunnels or why they had to be secret, and he just shrugged. Americans obsessed with conspiracies, he said. Satan, black magic, too much TV. He wasn't wrong about that, and the conversation ended there. Afterward, I related the whole thing to Rashida, and since neither of us were interested in conspiracy theories, we wrote it off, using the basement as a place to stash valuable items overnight. As it turned out, all of us had been wrong, from the school kids on down, but not in the way I thought. Rashida was waiting out front of the middle unit when I arrived. She'd always been more of a night owl, so I wasn't surprised to find her more alert than I was. What did surprise me was how excited she was. "What took you so long?" I sighed. "Radish, come on. You woke me up from a dead sleep, and I still got here in 20 minutes. Cut me some slack. We're not going to be able to file the insurance claim till the morning anyways." She waved dismissively as if I completely missed the point. "This isn't about insurance, Robbie. Come on, you have to see this." With that, she actually took my hand to lead me inside, something she hadn't done in years. Her palm was soft and warm. No one was more surprised than me, and how my heart skipped a beat. She led me through the darkened storefront, winding a path through locked display cases to the back room where I expected to find a gaping hole which led to the cellar. Instead, it looked exactly the way it always had. White walls in dire need of a paint job, a desk with a fax machine, and small piles of paperwork, a kitchenette which were definitely installed against zoning rules. The floor, with its hatch to the basement, was completely intact, which could only mean it was the basement itself which had caved in. But caved in to what? Rashida's eyes were shining in excitement as she kneeled to grip the hatch's steel ring. With a soft grunt, she hauled it up, revealing the wooden staircase and a rush of hot air, fragrant with a spice I'd never smelled before. "Radish, what the hell is that? Where's it coming from?" She was grinning, an expression I knew all too well. We were about to do something expensive, stupid, or both, but it would be memorable. "Go look, just watch your step at the end. There's not much of the floor left. I'm gonna get us flashlights." "Flashlights? Rashida, why do we need flashlights?" But she was already out the door. The heavy wooden steps creaked beneath me as I began to descend. Once I was far enough to see the rest of the stairs, it was obvious what she was talking about. The cellar's dirt floor had crumbled away from the far wall, forming a rough incline leading further down, way down from the look of it. The basement lights gave out after maybe 10 feet. Son of a bitch, I thought. Gersum's kids had been right after all. There really was a secret tunnel down here. "Hey," I started to shout before her voice responded from above. "Gersum's gonna be pissed. His daughters were right." I chuckled. I read my mind. Rashida descended the steps behind me. "Zia will be thrilled. She could use the win." "Why? What's up with her?" Sheeta cocked her head, giving me her best "Are you for real" look. "She didn't get into Brown. She's heartbroken. Do you never ask Gersum anything?" "I guess we talk about other things." She rolled her eyes and tucked one of the heavy mag lights she'd brought under her arm long enough to tussle my hair, which I always hated. "Oh, Rob Bot, when you finally get that empathy chip installed, you're going to be unstoppable." Annoyed, I pulled my head back and pretended I didn't see the hurt look flash across her face. "So, what are we going to do about this?" I indicated the yawning hole under our shop, knowing full well what her answer was going to be, even before she pressed one of the flashlights into my chest. "We're going to go check it out, obviously." It was pointless to argue. Stepping onto the slope, I discovered it wasn't loose dirt, instead being harder packed than I expected. Then, just as I descended to the furthest edge of the basement's light, my foot hit something even more solid. With a flick, the maglite revealed what appeared to be a stone step poking out from the earth. Sweeping the cone of light further into the dark, I saw even more steps descending what looked to be hundreds of feet down. Stranger still, the walls were burnished black and smooth to the touch. "What is that, Rob?" I slowly shook my head, still sliding my fingertips across the flat surface. "I don't know. LA is basically built on sand and bullshit. You have to go thousands of feet down until you get to anything close to bedrock, and this isn't bedrock. I've never seen anything like it." "It kinda looks like glass," Sheeta observed. "Kind of," I agreed, but I rapped on it with a knuckle, and instead of the dull tapping sound you'd expect from glass, it rang out like a bell. Glass doesn't do that. The sound continued to echo below for what felt like 30 seconds. I was incredulous. Together, we continued descending the stone steps, our mag lights casting twin cones of brightness ahead of us. After 30 or so minutes of this, with no end in sight, we began to see a glow below us. It was coming from within the smooth walls, soft green luminescence in a diamond shape. Another 50 or so steps, and we were level with it, an unmoving, noiseless source of dim light. "Radish, turn your light off for a sec." She gave me a look that suggested I had lost my mind. "Trust me, you can turn it right back on, but I don't know if you'll need to." After a few seconds worth of deliberation, Rashida snapped off her flashlight and I did the same. Just as I suspected, the luminescence became stronger in the dark, which was even warmer and smelled more strongly of that mysterious spice than before. A green glow soon suffused the entire passageway, emanating from the diamond on the wall. I inched closer, inspecting the source of the light. "What is it, Rob?" I shook my head. "I don't know. It looks like moss, maybe? Since when does moss glow in the dark? It happens. There's one called Goblin's Gold that grows in caves, but it grows wild. This looks cultivated." The obvious question of who could have cultivated it hung in the perfumed air. Sheeta then asked another question, one that hadn't occurred to me. How long can it stay alive, sealed in the wall like that? I really had no idea and told her so. It shouldn't be able to survive at all without air, and yet I indicated the walls around us, which reflected and amplified the eerie light. It was bright enough that I could see a second green diamond several dozen steps below. How far had we gone already? I wondered. Surely it had to have been hundreds of stairs by now, if not more. Rashida's lips were pressed tightly together and drawn to one side in what I like to call her hesitant face. She was impulsive, not stupid, and after her initial bursts of enthusiasm wore off, she was even better at analyzing risk than I was. We both knew that the further we went, the greater the chance of one of us slipping or worse, another larger cave-in. Airflow was a concern too. How deep underground could we go and still expect to find breathable air? What do you think, Radish? Keep going or go back? She inhaled, letting the breath out long and slow. Well, we don't know how far this goes. We've come like 1,400 steps already and 1,500. Are you sure? I thought it was a few hundred tops. Nope. No, 1,400 at least. I got bored counting around 1,200 and stopped paying as much attention. My legs are gonna be killing me tomorrow. She absent-mindedly rubbed at her quads like preventative massage might ward off the promised stiffness. I did some quick mental math. There's usually 15 stairs in a flight, 2 flights in a story. If we've gone down 1,400 steps, that's almost 47 stories. Can we be 47 stories underground? That's half the bank tower downtown. Even in the dim light, I could see her turning that concept over in her mind. So we're more than half the U.S. bank tower high, but underground? I nodded. And someone is growing moss that glows specifically to be a light source? Yes. Her lip began to curl in a smile I hadn't seen for a long time. That sounds like an adventure to me. So down the stairs we went. The only way to note passing time or even progress was the number of diamonds we encountered, and by the time the stairs ended and a hard-packed dirt floor, we'd seen more than a dozen. Going from the stone steps to dirt, I felt myself wobble, my own muscles promising the same prolonged future ache Rashida had been talking about. A change from stone to dirt wasn't the only difference we encountered once the ground had leveled out. Whereas previously, the top of the passage had been maybe 5 feet above our heads, it was now vaulted by some 20 feet, giving the hallway an almost ecclesiastical air. The walls were slightly different too. On our left, the strange black coating remained, covering everything right up to the top of the dome above. But on our right, the texture was completely different. It had become a sort of grooved stone which bulged slightly in the middle. Unlike the other wall, this one was warm to the touch, my fingers easily sliding through its smooth stone lines. As you might have gathered by now, I know rocks and plants fairly well, and I had never encountered any stone like this. There was also greenery here, over and above the moss which lit our way. A thick-rooted black plant, maybe 1.5 feet high, grew thickly along the convex stone wall's base. I kneeled, using my flashlight to prod at its long, light leaves. It was unmistakably the source of the spice we'd been smelling this whole time, though I still couldn't say exactly what it was, apart from almost fennel, but not exactly. Since the unusual color of light made it difficult to examine the plant properly, I thought it might be easier to snap off a single stalk and bring it back topside. I grabbed the plant and twisted, its bark fighting me for a moment until I cranked harder and it produced a cracking noise that sounded like a pistol shot, amplified by the chamber's particular acoustics. Everything changed after that. Once we eventually returned to the surface, I'd learned that the entire event lasted only 8 seconds and was localized to the Los Angeles area, but thousands of feet below the surface, it felt as though we were seeing the end of the world in slow motion. A roar suffused the air as if the earth above and below us was being torn in two. Rashida screamed something and pointed at the stone wall. Even if she didn't need to, the bulging rock was clearly in motion, grinding along from left to right, revealing 100 inscrutable petroglyphs carved into its surface. Finally, for just a second, there was a gap, and what we saw through it will haunt us until the day we die. A yawning chasm, its glassy walls glowing with the sun's intensity. Whole forests of the black-barked greenery at our feet grew from a colossal column at the abyss's center, and around it, all coiled, a stone serpent too large for a human eye to take in its enormity. Relative to this scale, its movements were nothing, and yet still caused a rumbling so loud I thought my heart might burst. Before the beast's tail moved back into place, I caught sight of something Rashida didn't. A single slitted eye, the size of a small city, gazing upward at me. In it, I saw galaxies full of purple and white nebula collapsing, mountains of molten rock crashing like waves across the surface. What I didn't see was any trace of humanity. In that moment, I knew that whatever the beast was, it was as separate from mankind as we were from distant space dust, and it was now as aware of me as I was of it. After that, it was gone, its bulky body again serving as the wall for a glowing corridor which had lost its appeal for adventuring or anything else. It was hours before Rashida and I were able to climb, our lungs and legs burning, back to a surface ravaged by what instruments measured as a 6.7 magnitude earthquake. Without a word between us, we got into my car and pulled out of the pawn shop's lot. Surveying the devastation, I reached out to take her by the hand, and she held on tight.
Subject: Beast in the Valley. User: AltGunny44. Posted March 3, 1998.
I've carried this truth for over 40 years. It's there in my bones, like the cold that pierced my fatigues on that night in Korea, 1951. We were just fucking kids then. Me, Jacob, and the rest of the boys in our squad sent to patrol a valley that wasn't on any map. It was the kind of place that made your skin itch before you even stepped foot in it. Dead quiet, no birds, no wind. Just the sound of our boots crunching over frostbitten earth. It was a place we never should have been, in a war we never should have been fighting. Jacob was my closest friend, came up through boot together and ended up in the same unit. This was our second tour. We'd been through some shit for sure, and if there's anyone I trusted, it was him. That night, he walked ahead of me, rifle swung across his chest, muttering about the cold. He never saw it coming. None of us did. Officially, the report says he stepped on a landmine. That's what they told his family. But that is a lie. Because I saw what really happened. We'd been ordered to check out the valley earlier that evening. Command said there had been reports of enemy movement, though no one could say for sure. Intelligence was always murky, half rumors, half guesswork, but that didn't matter. We were grunts and had no fucking choice but to follow orders. The spot was about 5 clicks from our camp. The terrain was rough, the ground half frozen and uneven, making every step feel like we were walking across brittle bones. The trees loomed over us, twisted and bare, their branches clawing at the night sky. Even the air felt wrong, thick with something I couldn't put a name to. We should have turned back. At first, it was just a feeling, the kind of quiet that settles before a storm where even the wind holds its breath. The deeper we went, the worse it got. Then came the smell. It hit us like a wall, rancid, thick, like rotting meat left out in the sun too long, but there was something else under it, something fouler, like wet fur and mold and decay, all mixed together. It clung to the back of my throat, made my eyes water. "Christ," Jacob muttered, pulling his scarf up over his nose. "What the hell is that?" "Dead bodies?" someone suggested. "Might be a mass grave." I wasn't so sure. I'd smelled death before, but this was different. I gripped my rifle tighter. The others did the same. No one wanted to admit how bad this felt, and that's when we heard it. Low at first, almost too quiet to notice, a deep, guttural rumble, like the earth itself was growling. It wasn't a wolf, wasn't any kind of animal I'd ever heard before. It was something else, something big. Then, in the distance, 2 pinpricks of yellow light appeared between the trees. Eyes watching us. They didn't blink, they didn't waver, just stared. Jacob took a step forward. "You see that?" "Yeah," I whispered. The eyes moved, faster than anything that size should be able to. One second they were far away, the next they were closer, weaving through the trees like a shadow slipping through the dark. We barely had time to react before it lunged. The thing, God help me, I don't know what else to call it, was fucking massive. Taller than any man, but like a nightmare come to life. It had a shape of something human, but the features were all wrong. Too long, too stretched, too swollen. Its fur was thick and matted, caked with dirt and blood, hanging off its frame like wet rags. Its face, Christ, its face was something between a wolf and an ape, twisted and snarling. Its lips curled back to reveal jagged teeth stained yellow with age, and fuck did it stink, a putrid smell that made your eyes water, far worse than what we'd encountered on our way in. Hell, worse than anything I'd ever smelled before or since, like disease and death rolled into one. Jacob didn't even have time to scream before it was on him. One swipe from its claws tore through his fatigues. His flesh sent him sprawling backward into the bush. Blood sprayed the ground. The rest of us opened fire, the night exploding with gunfires, the muzzle flashes lighting up the horror in front of us. Blood was everywhere, eyes flashing, claws scraping. It didn't stop. The bullets hit, but it barely flinched. It moved too fast, weaving between the trees, lunging at us with impossible speed. I saw it grab Jacob by the throat, lift him like he weighed nothing. His hands clawed at its grip, his boots knocking against the dirt, but it was no use. It squeezed, and I heard the snap. Then it vanished into the trees, dragging my friend's body with it. But us, we ran. God help me, we ran. We didn't stop until we reached base, breathless and shaking, rifles still clutched in white-knuckled grips. When the officer asked what happened, we told them Jacob stepped on a mine. That's what they wrote down. That's what made it into the reports. We told him his body had been blasted into pieces and we couldn't retrieve him. But I know what I saw. I know what took him. Now, all these years later, I'm the only one left who remembers. The others are gone. Cancer, heart attacks, old age. I wonder if any of them ever wanted to tell the truth either, if they ever lay awake at night thinking about those yellow eyes in the dark. I've spent decades wondering if I should say anything, but in the end, who'd believe an old man rambling about monsters in the Korean wilderness?
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.